Welcome, 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 welcome everybody to our continuing series where we talk to professors, writers, reporters, columnists, activists, anybody on the left, anybody on the right. As long as they have thoughtful perspectives, we want to bring them directly to you, the public, so that you could do this thing that was popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe to come back, maybe it won't. With us today, it is our privilege to have, and I'm going to give it one try, David Paleologos. Was that close?
That sounds pretty damn good for one try.
Okay, that was my first try. I've never tried to pronounce it before then. Okay, Director of Political Research at Suffolk University in Boston. David Paleologos is the director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center, SUPRC, where he has worked since 2002, conducting statewide polls and bellwether survey analyses in Massachusetts and elsewhere. SUPRC presidential primary polls have predicted outcomes in many key battleground states. Cutting-edge survey research has gained both national and international attentions for its high degree of accuracy. SUPRC results have been reported on by hundreds of major news organizations on television, radio, in print, and online. The SUPRC bellwether model, authored by David, is designed to predict outcomes, not margins of victory. Used both locally and nationally, the model has an 85% accuracy rating in predicting straight-up winners. In addition to his duties as director of the Research Center, David is also a lecturer at the College of Arts and Sciences and Government Department, where he teaches political survey research. In this intensive, immersive course, students create, implement, analyze their own survey during the semester. Before beginning his career in academia, David was one of the Bay State's most sought-after pollsters and field operatives. He is a frequent guest lecturer on political survey processes at a number of New England area schools and institutions. A graduate at Tufts University, David is also a member of the American Association of Public Opinion Research and the Northeast Political Consultants Association, and sits on the board of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Service at the Suffolk University Law School. Some of his publications include usage and performance of bellwether polls for election forecasting, use of bellwether samples to enhance pre-election poll predictions, and a pollster on polling for the American Behavioral Scientists. As of summer 2002, he has partnered with the Boston Globe, USA Today. Other partners include the Salt Lake Tribune, Cincinnati Enquirer, New York Daily Record, Reno Gazette, Arizona Republic, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Detroit Free Press, Louisville Courier Journal, and NBC 10 Boston Telemundo, NECN. And this was how I found the professor. But before we get to that, let's check in and see how we did. Professor, did I get anything wrong? Do I need to?
No, you're on a roll right now.
Okay.
We've added a couple of partners since the bio publications we have done. We did a poll last year, near and dear to your heart, for the LA Times, part of our City View polling of inner cities. And we just recently finished a poll for the Seattle Times. So we're continuing to try and spread our wings a little bit.
That's awesome. Since we got the first part done, we'll go right to part two, which is this article here. Voters divided by party in views on Biden legitimacy and our country's biggest challenges, published in 2021. Professor, what is this article about, and why did you write it in 2021? And before you answer, if you could answer as both an academic and as an American with two working eyeballs, and if you could pretend that I've been living in a cave the last 5 years, what was going on in 2021? Why was this a worthwhile topic? What's going on in America?
Sure. So, we had just, we were in the middle of COVID. 2021, we were sort of reeling from January 6th, the inauguration of Joe Biden, who secured the most votes of any political candidate for president in the history of our country. But we found, and the article touches on this, that, in the old days, in the 1990s, and believe it or not, I was polling back then, there was a big group of voters in the middle who were ripe to be persuaded. Today, in 2023, there are very few people who are persuadables. And so when Bill Clinton was running for president in the 1990s, in my first academic journal article, I talked about how everything was geared around persuasion and very little about identifying and getting out your core bases and drawing on core pools of support where you didn't have to persuade anybody, you just had to find them and bring them to the polls. Today, it's vastly different. And Gallup actually did a study that did a sort of an intersection of the left and the right, and the sort of the common area,
right,
if you will, was the persuadables. And it was a big area in the chart that they produced. Now it's very much polarized. And so the only people who matter are the independent voters from a few states. You know, we boast a country of 330 million residents. And when you boil it down, in the end, in 2024, 12 million people, you know, between 8 and 12 million people who are independents from swing states will make the difference in the election. And the reason is because of polarization, because Democrats vote Democrat, Republicans vote Republican, and you've got to figure out, and the candidates and their committees and their PACs have to figure out how to micro-target the hot button issues among independents. And it's ironic because independents are the least connected to the political process. Democrats, they're following news. Republicans are following their news, and they're very much connected. They're participants in town halls and town forums, whether it be in rural areas or in city government. Independents are not. They are the least connected to political parties, to political institutions, and yet they are the most important people in terms of the outcome of the election. Yeah, this is that chart, and you know, you can see how ideologically it's shifted. You know, in the left chart, you've got that big intersection of the gray and the red there into that big area, and then you look over to the 2014 chart, and it's just a little mound, and flanked by big on the left Democratic area and big on the right.
The overlap in 1994 was larger than both the red and the blue combined. And then you move that to 2004, the overlap is the same size as just the red or just the blue. They're now all equal size. So we went from where the overlap was the dominant 2/3 form to where now it's just a third. It's not dominant. It's equal in power to the other two. And that's our super polarized thing. And it's even worse now in 2020 than 2014. I just want to confirm two things I heard from you, just to make sure I'm getting this right. In the 1990s, you're a pollster, you're doing polls, you're academic, you're experienced with politics. And what you're saying is you didn't really need to worry about getting your base activated in the 90s. It was about being able to persuade the average American.
Yeah. So when George Stephanopoulos was working for the Clintons back in the 90s and late 80s, actually, he knew that the bases were important, but it was all about, for Clinton, and he was great at this, rapid response. You know, Mike Dukakis made a lot of mistakes in the 88 election against senior George H.W. Bush, right, because he was more thoughtful, he was more deliberative, and he didn't respond as quickly as he should have to potentially turn the tide when the numbers began to break against him in the late 80s. In the 90s, Stephanopoulos kind of learned from his fellow Greek, Mike Dukakis, about what you need to do immediately. And the rapid response was all about persuasion. It was all about what's the real story here? What is the new, everybody uses the word narrative. What is the narrative, and how can we persuade the people who need to be persuaded? And that carried not only through to both Clinton elections, young George Bush also used it, and he used it successfully for his 2 terms, and so did Barack Obama. And Barack Obama, of course, employed the technology of the time to really accelerate the kind of messaging that he needed to accelerate, given some of the obstacles he had when he first ran against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I remember reading about that Obama was the first to historically use the internet and social media tools as they came out about that time correctly. And so I think what you're saying now is that was 1990s, and now why even try to worry about persuading anybody? It's all about getting your base activated is the way to win. So we've gone from focus on the persuadables to who cares about the persuadables? Just focus on your base. Is that a roughly correct summation?
Well, this is how I believe, and I know that to be true. And so in 2012, Suffolk University, we're always looking to pull something new and different with what other colleges and universities aren't polling, to kind of keep us sharp and to kind of be on the cutting edge of research. So I came up with this idea. It wasn't an original idea. It had been done before, but just not by universities, to poll people who were not likely voters. Now, everybody knows that when you get a call from any pollster or an online panel, you have to make your way through some screens. You have to be a resident, you have to be a voter, you have to be express intensity, or you have to be a likely voter. And this poll that I wanted to do, and we did it in the summer of 2012, was the opposite. If they said they were a voter or a likely voter, we hung up. we only wanted to talk to the people who weren't registered to vote, or who were registered but weren't interested in voting. And so we did this poll, and I figured it would be a great filler in the summer of 2012, between then and the fall elections, and the different conventions for the party, which happened in the late summer, early fall. When I got to the conventions, and I went to both, all people wanted to ask me about was that poll that we did back in August. And I learned from President Obama's organization, because one of his operatives was a Massachusetts guy, that they used the poll data to find people who were unlikely voters, but who they knew would vote for Barack Obama, because the poll said, if you were registered or if you were to vote, would you vote for Obama or Mitt Romney, who was the Republican nominee in 2012? And John Walsh, who was this national operative, very well known, I ran into him at a wake of all places, and he said, I used that poll all fall to find voters in Florida, in Virginia, and many of the key states, New Hampshire, of people. We didn't have to persuade them. And there was that word, persuade. All we had to do was find them and bring them out to vote. Now, Trump did this in 2016. He found people in the rural areas of the country who we were screening out because they weren't registered and they weren't likely to vote. They were farmers. Many of them were disabled. Many of them were poorer. Had economic challenges. Some were persons of color. Different group of voters, and he found them in the rural areas. And it was the same thing. Once he got them to register to vote, and he got them to animated about his campaign, he pulled voters out that many of us didn't pick up because they were being screened out. And so you've got this volleying going on from every 4-year cycle, where candidates and campaigns are employing different ways to access the pool of voters. Because what we know from the U.S. Elections Project is that 81 million people didn't vote in 2020. Now think about that. Joe Biden got 81 million votes in 2020 and set the record, as I say, with the most votes ever. But 81 million people also who were eligible to vote, not just residents, not just people who weren't eligible to vote, citizens and so on, people who could have voted didn't vote. And so that's the reason why we went in the field. We've done 2 of them. We're going to do another one this year, hopefully, if we can find the money, to poll these people who just shrug their shoulders and they don't believe any of this matters. They don't believe it affects their lives. They don't believe their vote counts. They're disgusted with they don't like the fact that there are just 2 choices on the ballot in most elections. And they have a right not to vote. No one's going to put a gun to their head and make them vote. But 81 million people is a lot of people.
It is. And we don't do forced or required voting like they do in Australia. I've heard some people say that that's a suggestion. You bring those things up and it just comes to me. I remember in 2016, and I don't like Trump either. And he was a bad president, not very popular. But people forget that during the campaign with him and Hillary Clinton, both of them came up as equally unliked during the campaign trial. And both of them were under 50%. So like we're going into an election where half the country says, I don't like either person. And Hillary was just as hated as Trump. Now, he changed that when he became president, sure. But then we could fast forward to the last couple of years. Biden's popularity, especially after Afghanistan, dropped down to Trumpian levels. So you could see election after election, it's like people are going, I don't like any of these people. I mean, it's certainly not like Obama. When Obama was here or Clinton or Reagan, there was a star and people were amazed. Now we have 2 people and they're both like, okay, pick. But my question for you is that it sounds like what you're saying is that Trump and Obama did the same thing. They recognized that instead of trying to convince somebody or persuade them, it's better to go find the people who would choose you anyways without any persuasion. They're just not voting. And that Obama did that to win, and then Trump did that to win.
And it's cheaper. It's cheaper to just find the person and initiate a contact. There's a little bit of a curve because they don't want to vote. They're not predisposed to voting. But when you think of the tens of millions of dollars that are going to be spent on, mailings and television and targeting and social media. And, it's big business, but the problem with persuasion is you can persuade somebody and then lose the argument the next week if something else happens or if there's an event.
Right.
It's not the case with accessing the pool of core voters. You find that person, it's very unlikely your opponent's going to find the exact same person because the person that you found is predisposed to voting for you by virtue of the statistics that we uncovered. So that demographically, once you find that person, all you have to do is get them to either throw in a mail-in vote, register, obviously, if they're not registered, get a mail-in vote, and that's a vote in the bank. You don't have to call that person on election day. You don't have to GOTV, get out the vote. You don't need any of that, internal machinery, and the vote's in the bank. And that's kind of what happened in the Senate race in Pennsylvania and in a lot of these other races where early margin, or an early lead carried a lot of Democratic candidates, even though they may have technically lost on election day.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. And I had never heard this before. I had talked to you. I've talked to a lot of people, done a lot of reading. I had never heard that, focusing on the base and not being too worried about persuading the middle started with Obama in 2012. I've never heard that. Yeah. I heard, it started with Trump. Everything was perfect before Trump got here. And then he single-handedly made everything horrible.
Right.
I never really bought that.
People don't want to talk about the people who don't vote. It has a bad feel to it. It's bad for civics. It's bad for democracy. People don't like stories about it. And we didn't care. We knew that it was a big block of votes. We wanted to poll the people. We wanted to find out what was going on, why so many people weren't voting. And so it creates an opportunity in terms of identifying and bring people. Look, if everybody voted, then it would be about persuasion, right? If everybody voted, there'd be no nuggets to find hiding under a rock in a rural area or in an inner city. But because so many people don't vote, people don't realize that there's a treasure trove of voters on both sides that are sitting out there waiting to be plucked. And the good organization and the good campaign finds it and uses it to beat us, to beat the pollsters. Right. I mean, that's one way to beat us, is because we go through the process of, traditional screening. And if we're screening out the people that a campaign is recruiting, unless that person is polled a week before the election when they've finally been accessed by the campaign, we'll miss that person. And that's one way that campaigns can beat us, that can beat pollsters, is by finding those unlikely or unregistered voters that are sitting out there, and there are a lot of them.
Is it? I have a question for you. So I have heard, since you brought it up, there was another question I wanted to ask you, but I'll ask you this one first. Is I have heard from some people, hey, you know how the pollsters couldn't predict Donald Trump winning in 2016? Oh yeah, and they couldn't predict Brexit. Well, the thing is, so basically the debate goes like this. If you look at political polarization, there's roughly two camps on at least one debate. And it's one is led by Morris Fiorina, and the other's led by Abramowitz is his last name. And Morris Fiorina says, we don't really have political polarization amongst the people here and in America. I know people say that, but it's not true. And the reason that I know that, as Morris Fiorina says, is that I have a lot of national opinion polls. And they show me that 79% of Americans want women to have access to abortion, and 65% want reasonable gun control, and 80% want safe schools. So, see, we're not divided because I have these national opinion polls, and they show a majority of America's agreed on these nations. On the other hand, you have Abramowitz, who says, you might have those opinion polls showing that, but clearly the public's divided. I mean, come on. It's ridiculous to act like it's not. And I had trouble understanding, how could you have political polarization of the people and have polls that at the same time seem to show a majority of the public agreeing? And one theory I heard was, and please correct my ignorance, I don't know what to think. We don't have polarization. I got a bunch of polls showing everybody agrees mostly. I have heard a theory, though, that it goes something like this. The Trump MAGA people don't participate in polling anymore, and that's skewing your numbers way off. What would you say to all those thoughts and theories, Professor?
So when you look at the actual data and you look at Real Clear Politics, and I would encourage people to go to see how Suffolk University fared, not only in the 2022 midterms, but the last 5 election cycles. They can go to suffolk.edu/SUPRC, which is an acronym for Suffolk University Political Research Center. I think what you'll see is that there are variations, but when you look at, for example, 2016, and Hillary Clinton easily won the popular vote, most of the polls had Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote. She won more votes than Donald Trump, 2016, hands down. But when you look at some of the sort of the internals that we were looking at, and there were some internals I couldn't talk about because the subsets were too small. But for example, in 2016, I noticed that you mentioned correctly that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump had higher unfavorables than favorables, which was a bizarre situation. You had people who hated both of them, 25% in some cases, some states. But when you looked at the people who said they were voting third party in 2016 and undecided, Hillary Clinton's unfavorables were higher than Donald Trump's. Ooh. Again, it wasn't something we could splash in the LA Times because we were looking at 25 respondents and 25 respondents, third party and undecided. But I remember looking at those numbers saying, it's too small of a subset. It's not what we would call a significant subset. Margin of error is through the roof on a small subset like that. But I was seeing the same thread from state to state. And so that was one of those elections where, you know, Trump threaded the needle. He won the Electoral College, even though he lost badly in the popular vote. So the polls have been wrong before, but I don't subscribe to the polls being wrong all the time. I think that's just a comfortable fallback for people who are frustrated with politics. I mean, we take our work very seriously. We had a really good midterm cycle in 2022. We've done really well over the last 5 cycles. We've made mistakes. I've made blunders like everybody else, and you try to learn from them. And you take your hits when you need to take your hits. And the key is to learn from them. But in terms of your original question about polarization, I mean, every time there's research, there's differences depicted. Right. I mean, even take the U.S. Census. I mean, when we do the census, what happens? They break out men, they break out women, they break out white alone, they break out 2 or more races. That's all we do is take information and parse it out. Doesn't mean that we're polarized necessarily. When are you broadcasting this, by the way?
This is live.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So for all of your viewers, I want you to, on the polarization question, we are going to be releasing an Ohio poll next week on different days with the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Columbus Dispatch, and USA Today. You're going to see polarization on the political questions we asked, but you may see, as you had indicated, you may see consensus on some issues that we polled. So there is a dialectic. You can have a polarized electorate when it comes to personalities, and there is. We saw it with Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, even Joe Biden, but you can also have agreement on issues. And where popularity is more important than issues, those candidates will prevail despite the issues, even if those candidates disagree with the issues in that particular state, in this case, Ohio.
Okay.
And vice versa. There are times where specific issues are going to draw specific responses at the polls. For example, in 2022, in our analysis, we learned that independent women broke from independent men. We do Democratic men and women voted Democratic. Republican men and women voted Republican. Independent men voted Republican by 20 points. But independent women broke from independent men, which allowed Democratic candidates for Senate to beat back challenges from Trump-endorsed Senate candidates on that one issue. It wasn't a personality thing. It was that one issue, which was the overturn of Roe versus Wade. That's still an important demographic to keep in mind for 2024.
I have a question about that. I just want to wrap this up. So there is nothing to the idea that MAGA voters, about 68, 72 million people, don't trust institutions, don't trust the government, buy this idea of the deep state, and so are not as participating in the poll. I've also heard people say that liberals are way more enthusiastic about taking poll questions and giving their political answers. So I think what you're saying is you guys take that into account, and so we don't need to worry about that skewing the polls at all.
So you always worry, okay? And there's nothing foolproof in this business. But I will say to you this: if I'm polling a region of Ohio and I'm getting refusal, knowing that Trump won that particular region, that group of counties, 70-30. those people who have hung up and not participated in the poll haven't been excluded. We just need to make that many more calls in those same rural counties, in that same geographic area, to get the quota. Now, it may turn out awkward, and you may get somebody or a disproportionate amount of people who are enthusiastic who are Democrats in a rural area. That can happen both ways. You can get a conservative to answer in a city or in a suburban area. But overall, those Trump voters aren't going to be excluded if you set quotas in those geographic areas, because you have to get a certain amount of respondents from that area. And if that area is rural, probability says that you're probably going to capture more times than not the sentiments of those people in those rural areas. It may take us more attempts. Yeah. More Trump voters could hang up on us in those rural areas, but that doesn't mean that that faction is excluded. We'll get enough people who will fill the quota for that particular county. And if they turn out to be Trump voters, which is probably going to be the case, then so be it. We filled a quota, and then we move on to the next region.
So even if you get a bunch of people saying, I don't want to vote, you'll make sure to make enough phone calls to get enough people to fill up that survey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. The whole idea of random selection is that not only everybody who's eligible to vote has a chance to be called, but also that the geographic proportions of a particular area will be represented as if we were taking a presidential election in 2024. And we can't close out the survey just polling Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and just stop calling after that. We have to make sure that every geographic area, you can't call every county if you're not doing a lot of surveys. If we're doing 500 surveys, likely voters in Ohio, there's 88 counties, but there are some counties that are Cuyahoga County, for example, is big, and it takes a big chunk of Ohio, but correspondingly, you've got other counties in Ohio which need to be represented as if we were holding an election in Ohio. So that's the idea. Okay. And so I guess I kind of half agree with what you're saying. Sure, more Trump voters are skeptical and can hang up, but I've monitored calls. You've got a lot of enthusiastic Trump respondents who want to participate in a survey, and they want to trash Joe Biden and talk about Donald Trump. Just, I would argue probably as much as Democrats as well. Okay. So I think it's a dynamic that probably exists, but it doesn't, I don't believe, depending on the pollster, it doesn't impact in the same way.
I don't know. That's why I bring people on and ask them. I've just heard from some reputable people with some surveys backing them up and some scientific studies that basically since Trump came along, he convinced everybody it's a deep state. Don't participate. Don't trust anything. They're all part of it. The media, academia are all in it together. And so they don't believe anybody. They don't believe you guys. They don't believe anybody. They don't want to participate. They think you're all in on it. And so the people who will actually participate in the poll aren't actually your hardcore Trump supporters. They may say they are. The actual hardcore ones will never talk to you. That's what I've heard from some people. I don't know what to think.
It could be true, but the next step, which is does it impact who you report, who you interview? I think that's a bit of a stretch because we picked up in our last national poll 11 or 12% of Republican voters said they'd be more likely to vote for Donald Trump if he was indicted or in the Georgia.
Sure.
So those people aren't hiding anything. They're not even being polite by saying it's not going to matter. It doesn't make a difference whether he's indicted. I'm still voting for him. They're saying I'd be more likely to vote for him if he was indicted.
I've heard that, but I'm just worried about. I'm just curious about the poll. So there's no
a pox on everyone's house.
Yeah. It's really seeing enthusiasm difference between Democrats and Trump supporters participating in polls. It sounds
I think it's driven by news events. So I think that after the indictments, a lot of Trump people took surveys and they just basically wanted to give everybody the middle finger. I think when Joe Biden has a good week or a good day, Democrats get excited. Keep in mind, there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for Joe Biden, even though he's the president. So, especially among young people. So there isn't this, massive group of people sitting by their cell phones waiting to take a poll for Joe Biden either.
Right.
And that's the problem. That's the problem for both parties, because we're picking up a lot of people on both sides are saying, you know what, I'd vote for an unnamed third party candidate. I don't feel connected to Biden. I don't believe he's done enough, or he's with it enough. And I don't want Trump, and I don't like DeSantis, and I want somebody new. And so there's an opening. There's a lane that's suddenly opening up. It may not be a person who could actually win, but Ross Perot's presence in both elections in 1992 and 1996 enabled Bill Clinton to win both elections with less than 50% of the vote. Bill Clinton never got over 50%.
Yeah, fair enough.
In either election. And that was because of a third party candidate. So that's something I think people may want to keep their eyes on, is the fact that Trump and Biden as nominees, and currently it looks like, at least snapshot in time today, they have the inside track to be the nominees, is leaving a very big void and a potential lane for a third party candidate to kind of disrupt things.
I have another question. I just want to leave it at, just for the public. There were some critics, and I'm not giving an opinion. There were some critics who said this explains the 2016 election and how a lot of polls weren't able to predict Donald Trump's success was because those supporters were choosing to not participate in the role because they didn't think it was fair. I can't validate that. It's just something I heard, and that was their theory as to why that would explain that. Basically, everybody, I think there was one poll in all of America out of the University of Southern California, which asked people on their sentimentality instead of their voting pattern, that accurately predicted them, and all the others didn't. But it's neither here nor there. I don't know what to think. I was just curious. I wanted to ask you.
And kudos to Dornside for finding that.
Yeah. That's my alma mater.
My son is a rising junior at USC. I actually just came back.
Fight on.
Yeah, absolutely. He's excited about his upcoming year.
Hey.
But and kudos to them. And they've done they did a great job in that race. And but as I say, a lot of the polls that had Donald Trump winning the popular vote were wrong in 2016.
True.
He didn't win the popular vote.
True. But
and a national poll, that's what we do. We know that national polls are kind of skew Democrat because California is such a big piece of the whole national pie. But those are the nuances. I think as people learn more about polling, and I'm glad you're doing this broadcast.
Thank you.
Because I think it helps people understand that we're not miracle workers. It's like the person that takes your blood. We want the body politic to be healthy, but the numbers are the numbers. However the numbers come out, they come out. And until you take your next blood test or whatever, things are going to change. Your diet's going to change, your activities are going to change, and that's how the country is. And different. And that's why I say a lot of times news events drive candidacies. Like when there's a shooting, guns and gun safety comes way to the top. Or if there's a flood or a major collapse, or then climate change, or as you know from being out in the Pacific time zone, you've got wildfires and floods and mudslides and earthquakes, and then that rises to the top. So those are all issues that we're looking at, and we capture them from month to month. Sometimes they dominate the news, and sometimes they don't.
I hear you. However, experts have said that 2016 and 2020 polling was off. We were told that Hillary Clinton was going to beat the pants off Trump like 60, 70%. Nowhere even close to that. And then we were told Biden's going to beat the pants off Trump. Nowhere even close to that. And there's not me, there's other experts going 2016, 2020, we were way off and we can't explain it. That's not me. That's other people saying that. I'm not trying to give an opinion. I'm just saying what I'm seeing other experts saying. We were really off twice in a row.
That's a fair criticism. And I view it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Suffolk and others to show their stuff. That's why I say, check out our website, suffolk.edu/SUPRC. We didn't even do the analysis. They have their own way of figuring out most accurate, but they ranked in the 2022 midterm cycle, the most recent election, the top schools, and they also ranked the last 5 election cycles, which do include both the 2020 presidential and the 2016 presidential. And I think it's good that the discussion happens because, to your point, originally they thought that the 2016 issue was, for some pollsters, not all pollsters, was because some pollsters weren't setting quotas and weighting by education. And so the theory was that the pollsters who were weighting by education did better than those who were not. And so there was like this proviso that came out that said, everybody has to take this into consideration because a lot of low information, low education voters were voting for Donald Trump. And if you didn't adjust for it, you were just going to be interviewing highly educated people who were more Democratic voting. And that turned out to be a good idea, but it didn't turn out to be valid. And so there are a number of other things to take into consideration. But I love the fact that, that we're examined this closely. And I think and this is the reason why 538 and Real Clear Politics, they have ranking systems, they have weighting systems to rate us for the work that we do, so that if you're not a stat person or a pointy head, maybe you just want the advice and the information that these websites put out, because they look at us up and down in terms of everything, the questionnaire design, media partnerships, sampling, track record, all of that. So,
sure. And you can see the Suffolk.edu, Suffolk.edu SPRC,
SUPRC,
let me change that, SUPRC. I find it interesting because there's people going, 2016 polls were off, but don't worry, we figured it all out for 2020. And then 2020 comes, and now I'm saying, we don't know why the 2020 polls were off. Okay, well, if your 2016 polls were off and you couldn't fix it by 2020, and your 2020 polls are off, maybe there's something you're missing, right? I mean, you couldn't fix the problem. You had 4 years to do it, and everybody's going, we kind of slipped up as an entire industry. 538 saying that, not me.
Yeah.
And I'm going, so can we say for sure that
you can't
themselves as MAGA voters, since we don't know why these two polls didn't work out?
You can't, and the reason is because you cannot control the supply of polls, and I can't control the supply of polls.
Sure.
So, for example, if I say to you in 2016 and 2020, the Major League Baseball had a drought in the amount of home runs that were hit, that's a fixed thing. You know pretty much what teams are in Major League Baseball. Maybe there's a team that comes in or doesn't or whatever, or moves or whatever. But for the most part, you know who the teams are. In the polling world, you don't have that. I mean, you have the major pollsters, Suffolk, Monmouth, Marist, Quinnipiac, as colleges or universities. And then you've got the private pollsters who do good work as well. But here's the difference. If 25 more pollsters entered the polling game from 20 to now 2024 with their own methodologies, we don't all do the work the same. Suffolk uses live callers. Some don't use anything live. Some use robocalling. Press 1 for Joe Biden, press 2 for Donald Trump. They have that. Or some use, that's called the IVR methodology. Some use panels, which have been accurate in the past, but some offer economic reward for the panelists. And we don't believe, many of us don't believe that you should be on a political panel only for an Amazon gift card or the ability to get. So, I mean, we're all doing it differently. And it doesn't mean one is better than the other is better than the other. It's just that now between 20 and 20, if the people who are always polling get better and learn from our mistakes in 2016 or 2020, but 25 other pollsters are flooding Real Clear Politics, ABC polling, the HYJ polling, who show up on the scene. They get on Real Clear Politics, they're rated. They get on 538.com, they're rated. I mean, 538.com has 517 pollsters in their database, which was great for us because we were ranked number 1 in 2022 out of 517. But that could be 617 in 2024. There could be polls coming in that I don't even know about, organizations that I don't even know about. And if they are producing bad polls, they're going to drag us all down. So there's, as they say, you're only in control of what you're in control of. So, I may do in the final 3 weeks, we're judged in the final 3 weeks, our accuracy leading up to an election. I might do 7 polls, in the last 3 weeks, maybe 8 if we're lucky, and we can put it all together. There are some that might do 15, and they may be less reputable or not rated or new, and that's just going to drag the whole industry down. So, not to make an excuse for being wrong.
No. You are educating us. You are educating us, Professor.
I think we're all trying to do the best we can and to get it right. I mean, it's not in my interest or anybody's interest for us to flop in 2024. We're going to try and cross every T and dot every I. And the competition is terrific. I mean, there's some great researchers out there, and they look at our work, we look at their work, and but then if a lot of other people are coming in, and it's a bad cycle, we're all going to end up answering for everybody else.
You've given us a real insight into the polling world that I didn't know. So this has been an awesome interview. There's a lot of material on how, because the public only sees the polls as they're produced. We don't see any of the things you're talking about. Oh, there's a variety of people. There's different perspectives. They're coming together. We don't know any of that. We just know poll came out, says X, must be true. 538 says, here's our combined poll, must be true. That's all we see. Let me ask you about the article. Nearly 1 year into his presidency, 70% of Republicans maintain that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected president of the United States. 22% concede that he was. If you want to flip that around, 96% of Democrats believe Biden was duly elected. The table below with results from polls highlight that Joe Biden's legitimacy is not the only point of partisan contention. Republican and Democratic registered voters have entirely different views on what the biggest challenges for the country have been over the last 20 years. And then I think it shows this. So Democrats would say COVID-19 was the biggest challenge, but Republicans would say 9/11, or basically it's this poll right here. And you were showing that it looks like there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans on how they view America. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, it is correct. And the reason is because of the news that they consume. And you can see that in actual data with TV news. The One American News Network, Newsmax, Fox News viewer sees their most important issue through the lens of those broadcasts. The CNN MSNBC, PBS viewer is a different viewer, and they see the news that's most important to them. So, and this is what I talked about in that a pollster on polling article that I wrote, seems like a quarter of a century ago. It was actually a quarter of a century ago, but it tells us that the media is supplying what is being demanded, and then what is being demanded is only those news stations because it's being supplied. So, and you've done this, and I'm sure your viewers today have done this. If you not now, but if you snap on CNN and then flip to Fox and back to CNN, they may be talking about two totally different.
Oh yeah.
And so those viewers then regurgitate what they see and what is pleasing to them, what we call uses and gratifications theory. It's useful information to them and it's gratifying to them. So when we call them, that's what they're telling us. When we call the Fox, One American News, Newsmax person, they're telling us the other story. And so you've got two Americas. There's actually three Americas. There's the two Americas, there's the left, the right, and then there's the people, like I say, the 81 million people who are totally disconnected from all of this. And so that's a dangerous place to be, because one wonders, what is reality? What is reality?
We can't even agree on what the large national issue is. Well, I'm reading your article, and it looked like Americans can no longer agree on what the enemy is. If we were being chased down by a tiger or a madman with a gun, we'd debate on which one is the worst scenario, and we'd split. And that's ridiculous. In World War II, when Americans, I just watched Midway last night. I love that movie. When Americans were attacked in Pearl Harbor, there was a debate on what are we going to do. I mean, there was a couple people saying, let's not go into a full war, but nobody was like, oh, I don't know, maybe we should be allies with the Japanese. No, maybe we should attack them. And then you got 50%. There was none of that. None of that. And I was reading something about 9/11. No, there was a professor yesterday I was talking to about 9/11. That was supposed to bring us together. It lasted about a year and a half. And then we split into two camps. So not good, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it actually impacts the question. Like in the old days, we could ask the question, do you agree with Joe Biden's plan to do X, Y, Z? I can't do that anymore. I can't even link a politician with a plan because of the polarization of people. I need to get the information clean on the plan, not assigning who's proposed it or not because of the polarization. You've got to insulate the information and the question just on its merits. And that's why, as I say, not to tease the Ohio poll again, but that's why what you'll see is polarization with politicians. You will not see polarization in Ohio, which is, it's a red state, but on some key issues. And I think those issues are going to really tell a big story next week.
When did you notice this? When you've been in polling for decades, when did you notice? And I don't need an exact date, scientific answer. If you can answer as just a living human American who's living here and who gets scared occasionally like the rest of us and has two eyeballs. When do you remember going, oh, that's different? I remember I didn't have to used to do this with polls, and now I can't have the politician's name. When did you notice that?
So I would say in 2012. Which was
2012.
Yeah.
That's 4 years before Trump.
Yeah.
We're told this all starts with Trump.
Yeah. The beginnings of Trumpism began before Trump. And Trump began running in 2015, as you recall. But in 2012, when we did that unregistered, unlikely voter poll, I realized the people who were sitting on the sideline and the polarization that year, and it was a very challenging time. It was a very challenging time, and Barack Obama took a lot of incoming. He did in 2010. I remember Scott Brown got elected in Massachusetts, a Republican, to one Senator Kennedy's seat, the great Democratic lion in Massachusetts, who had died, and Scott Brown, Republican, won that Senate seat. And then you had this big anti-Obama backlash in 2010. Some of it might have been racist. Some of it might have just been anti-incumbency. Stock market had crashed in 2008. Everything was kind of just boiling over. And, we were reeling at the end of that first term. So for me, it was 2012. And then, the leading up to the Trump announcement in 2015, and then things really accelerated from there.
So if somebody came to you and said, America was perfect before Trump and he alone made us polarized, you would say to them?
I think he was a significant factor. I mean, if you go back and look at some of the speeches of Bill Clinton against Bush,
Dole or Bush,
and against Dole, it was pretty pointed. It was pretty nasty. Jimmy Carter against Ronald Reagan was very civil. There was a third-party candidate, John Anderson, I believe, in that race. And, but things began to get, nasty really quick and accelerate. And to me, it doesn't matter who was responsible. I mean, people are animals. We're all animals. We all live and love and hate. There's a lot of hate. It's hard to say that, one person can accelerate the hate and blow open the doors of hate. But hate is hate. There was a lot of hate in the 90s as well, and in the 2000s. And you're right. 9/11 did pull people together. But the damage that's been done since 2016 is trying to heal now. It's trying to heal. But the way the nomination process works, Biden's calling Republicans MAGA Republicans. Trump's making fun of Biden. It's crazy.
Do you recall? I think you do. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I got to ask because most people don't know about this. You do remember the speech Joseph Biden gave where he called out 78 million MAGA Republicans as basically enemies of the state?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not the type of politics that's the type of rhetoric that's going to keep people on the sidelines. I don't want to see 100 million people not vote next year, but it could happen. Not predicting it will happen, but it could happen. And what does that say about our democracy and our country? When 100 million people eligible to vote say, nope, I hate politics. I'm not educated enough. My vote doesn't matter. I'm too busy. It's not going to mean anything. Whoever's president is president, and that's that. I mean, that's a huge number. And, but with the kind of divisiveness that we've seen and the kind of rhetoric we've seen, I could see that 81 million easily crawling into the 90s. And,
wow,
who knows how high. And part of it is lack of enthusiasm. This is why there's a lane for an independent candidate. People aren't enthusiastic for Joe Biden, and they're not a significant amount and not enthusiastic for Donald Trump. So what are you left with? People are shrugging their shoulders, saying,
wow.
Put yourself in the head of a 21-year-old, my son, He's going to USC.
All right.
Do you think he feels connected to either Joe Biden or Trump?
No. I think he looks at them like skeletons. Like, oh my God, these guys are so old. They have no idea about me or my generation. At least Obama, who was technically an old man, he was 40-something, he was able to give this feeling to the youth that he understood them. Whether or not he actually understood them, I don't know. But he and Clinton were able to fake it, at least. And the youth at least bought enough of that. There's none of that now. None of that.
You're right. And young people, I think the mistake that Biden has made is that young people aren't necessarily exclusively about policy. I know from teaching young people, it's about personality. It's about personality. It's Instagram. It's TikTok. It's not about, college loans. We're working hard to secure college loans. That's great, but a lot of people, they're not even paying their own bills. They haven't seen or they haven't valued money yet. And then, we're policy. We are, people, in our age group and older are policy, and that's what you need. And, you need you need that, this is why AOC is so popular among young people.
Right.
I never had to explain to my son about AOC. He picked her up on TikTok before I even had a conversation with him. Go figure.
There's a lot of young men who followed AOC after she got elected. That's all I'll say. I'm not commenting further. But yeah, there was, oh my God. I have many Anglo friends. Every Anglo guy that I knew when AOC was elected go, have you heard about this Latino get elected? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Like 20 different dudes came out of the woodwork that day and they go, right on. You guys were never that interested in other politicians, but right on. I support it, right on. So anyways, neither here nor there. Let me introduce you to something. I know that this looks like a pin. This is actually a secret magic wand. I don't know if you can tell. Only I have this. Its magical powers allow me to transmit its use through this call to you. So I'm virtually giving you this magic wand. If you had this magic wand, poof! No more CNN, MSNBC, Newsmax, Fox News. Everything in this poll goes back to normal in a year.
I think we get rid of bad news. I think a lot changes. I really do. I think a lot changes, and it's hard to unravel what's been tightly wound for so long. But it's and I've done interviews with both sides. So
right on.
And I get it, and I know it's a business, but a lot of times, sometimes you have to turn down an interview, which is unheard of for a pollster, right? Everybody wants to be on TV or whatever, but I've actually had to turn down interviews because the premise of their segment in whatever block they were doing was based on my poll to say thus and such. Right. And if I didn't agree with what that segment was, I'd have to be honest and say, I can say this, but I can't say that. The poll's not
right.
That.
Of course.
And so that's hard to do. Now, I'm sure Suffolk would just prefer me to grab every interview possible, but for me, it's about the work. And if the work tells me, it informs me about a certain issue, then I'll talk about it. But I can't let someone use my poll to justify findings for a segment, and it's happened on both sides. So it's no one's more guilty.
On both sides.
It's part of the business. It's part of the business, I guess.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's some people who said we've been polarized since the 1970s. There's some people who said we've been polarized since the 1990s. There's some people who said, like you're pointing out, we've been polarized since Obama 2012. If it was Obama, that's 10 years ago. Yeah. If it's the 1990s, that's 20 years ago. If it's the 1970s, it's half a century. And what I'm wondering is, you have people used to thinking this way for so long, and all of a sudden we pull the TV channels away.
Yeah.
Everybody snaps back, or they've been programmed for so long they can never snap back.
Well, young viewership is off cable news now.
Sure.
So it's happening on its own.
Sure.
In terms of what others are saying, and I'm sure people can justify whatever using the facts that they have before them. I mean, I remember Jimmy Carter, and I mean, Ronald Reagan used to sit down with Speaker O'Neill from Massachusetts over beers, and they used to talk things through. That's civil, you know. Talk about your differences over a couple of beers. You can publicly make fun of each other and play the game, but I thought it was a lot more civil in the 70s and throughout the 80s. And I think Bill Clinton was that, you know, because he was such a rapid response guy, he really refocused his, you know, his responses on specific Republicans, because a lot of them they didn't like Hillary Clinton, even as his spouse. So, you know, he did the right thing, I think, as a husband, to try and avert that. But once the 2000s hit, I think Barack Obama brought a lot of people together. He brought a lot of people. I mean, he had the record, 69 million of most votes cast before Joe Biden. But then in 2012, after Obama's first term, for me, you know, I saw a lot of the ugliness and the darkness begin to surface with Obama as a one-term president seeking his second term.
Wow. Okay. I just wonder if we take away social media, we take away the news channels, it all snaps back, because there's a lot of people who study political polarization, and that's what they're saying. You know, just get rid of the news stations, get rid of social media, and everything will work out together. And my issue with that is that there's good evidence showing that we were very polarized in the 1990s and the early thousands, and that was before social media was what it is today, and that was before these stations were so aggressive, although they had been doing 24-hour news reporting for years. So I'm like, some things don't add up if that's the theory we're going with.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say, sort of related to that, is that we've been tracking in our national polls most trusted political news source, and the news source that has bubbled up to the top is PBS and NPR.
Really?
PBS and NPR, we didn't even have them on the list. I went to a media event down in DC, and I spoke with Judy Woodruff, and she said to me, "How come you guys aren't putting that on your polling?" And I said, "I'm going to add them in." And we did combine PBS and NPR, because there's like 13 options to pick from, but slowly they have bubbled up to almost number one as most trusted news.
Wow.
So there is hope for a non-commercial news outlet that just gives you the facts, the public hearings and the C-SPAN, and people can call in on the Democratic line, the Republican line, and the independent line, voice their opinions and have a civil discussion. So there may be hope for sort of a neutral dissemination of news.
That's why I like C-SPAN. It was so boring. I felt it was legitimately fair to both sides. They weren't a for-profit company. They weren't worried about being entertaining. So the one thing they seemed to be worried about was, like you said, they had an independent line, a conservative, and a blue. And Republicans can't go, oh, media domination, Hollywood sweethearts on the left, because Newt Gingrich famously used C-SPAN to push his message. They were just as available to, if you wanted to do it, you had to be media savvy, but if you wanted to do it, they seem to be very open to both sides. If we could get more of that independent news halfway through, are people willing to listen to that? The question I have is, if you had independent news and it was fair, I think it would go something like this. January 6th was an insurrection. It was bad. Yeah. Half the country doesn't want to hear that. There's a thing called the Durham Report. It came out from a federal investigation by full federal officers. Nobody said it was done incorrectly. It says that Hillary Clinton lied and used the FBI to make up a rumor about Donald Trump being put into office by the Russians. This has not been denied by any news outlet. They just won't talk about it. Right. And yet when I talk to Democrats about it, and I go, what about the Durham report and Hillary? It always goes like this. What? Oh, I've heard nothing about that. I can't talk on your conspiracy theory. It's a fact. But they don't mention it on CNN, MSNBC. So I can literally never have a conversation with any of the 100 liberals I've interviewed here about anything that Hillary did wrong, because they have absolutely no idea about it. And the moment you bring it up, they're trained to go, I haven't heard that before. Where'd you hear that, buddy? Fox News Conspiracy Hour? No. MSNBC at midnight when they didn't want to show it. CNN at midnight when they didn't want to show it.
No, and what's interesting is that there's an opening not only for an independent candidate in 2024, but there's also an opening for a news outlet to be the news outlet that people begin to trust and consume their news. And I think the major networks are trying to go in that direction. There's going to be some things that are going to happen over the next 6 to 9 months where, cable news is going to realize that they're losing their share because either Fox was wrong about something that they were alleging for months, or vice versa, or CNN. And it's costing them ratings. And let's face it, it's a business. And if they understand that their partisanship is costing them dollars, advertising dollars, then they will adjust, and the market will take care of itself. But in the meantime, we have what we have, which is a polarized country, and politicians and campaigns and political action committees need to conduct the business that they need to conduct to get their candidates elected with what we have today. And so you're probably going to see more of the same over the next 12, 15 months.
Is this why we're seeing Robert Kennedy running? Because he knows there's an opening for an independent third party person. I'm not endorsing him or not endorsing him. I'm just asking.
Yes, and he's going to go through the entire primary without a debate. We've had polling, and others have had polling showing him at 15 to 20%. If any Republican was polling at 15 to 20% in their primary, they would easily make the debate stage. But because there's this unwritten rule that an incumbent president doesn't need to debate or face an opponent in his own party, that's the situation. And what's ironic about this is that you've got Trump who's saying I'm not going to debate, and you've got Joe Biden who's saying I'm not going to debate. So you're going to have kind of like these two old rusty guys who are going to skip debates. I mean, Trump's basic MO is I'm way ahead. Let them all fight it out for the crumbs, and I'm not going to debate unless I absolutely have to. And Biden saying I'm not debating. So you have these two older nominees who are going to be certainly debate rusty come next September, October, who are going to have to face off against each other, maybe against a third party candidate, maybe not. And that's what you have. And that's why, going back to our original point, that's why I say there isn't a lot of enthusiasm on either side.
I get that norms change and they have to adjust. I like history, but the presidential debates seem to be a big part of letting the people at least feel that this was a decision for them to make. And then for both candidates to say, we don't need it, just seems to be a marker on the state of democracy in America today. The leader of both parties say, nah, we don't need to do that quintessential part of every election going back 200 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in our national poll, over 3 out of 4 likely Democratic primary voters said they thought there should be a series of Democratic debates. So,
people don't get what they want in a democracy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last question, and I'll let you go. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
You don't have to have an answer to this. I just wanted to ask because you've been really great at handling some existential questions. Independents are the least connected to political parties and institutions, and yet the most important to elections. Totally agree. However, I don't know if this is true. That's why I'm asking. I have heard some critics say that the more politically involved you get, the more automatically partisan you become. And so the idea of saying we need independents to become involved because they're not partisan won't work out, because the more they become involved, the more partisan they become.
That's true.
Oh,
That's true.
okay. You stumped me there. I was expecting more of a debate. Okay.
No, that's true. But the people who will decide the 2024 election may not be engaged between now and then. They may still be casual. They may be shoulder shrug voters, but they will be the most important voters in the 2024 general election, because they, believe it or not, some of them voted for Barack Obama and Donald Trump for whatever reason, however that mentality goes.
Get that.
And now, and maybe Joe Biden in 2020. So now you have Obama, Trump, Biden. Who knows what's next? But those voters can swing easily depending on whether the economy is in the toilet next year, whether or not we're in a war, whether or not there's another pandemic, whether or not, there's a major event, I'll say. And those voters in October of 2024 may just flip and go one way or the other way, depending on what's going on. And it's nothing that we can predict now as pollsters. And it's certainly not going to change how Democrats or Republicans vote. But those people who are tough to get a hold of because they're not at town halls and they don't go to community meetings, and they just work and they keep their mouths shut and they earn their money and, or do whatever they do, they are going to be the most important people.
Okay. How much faith do you have that America is going to work itself out of this, provided we don't get rid of the cable news stations and we don't get rid of social media? If we don't get rid of the infrastructure problems, how much faith do you have that we can, as a people, I don't know, culturally figure our way out through this?
I think we will. I think we've been through some amazing challenges, wars, the pandemic, attacks on our country. Americans have always risen to the challenge. I believe the country is amazingly strong and resolute when it needs to be. And it's only through, this is why I teach, it's only through education that we can teach civility and, an honest exchange of ideas and a discourse. And the more people get educated and the more people participate, I feel very optimistic about the government. It's not a perfect system. There are certainly things you can point to. Why not this? Why not that? We should abolish the Electoral College, this, that. There are a lot of things that could be improved, but as other countries go, and as well as I do, and I've traveled, in other countries, as other countries go, we're a great country and a great people, and the demographics are changing, and I just see good things ahead. And that's coming from a pollster that usually is a person that delivers dark news to people.
Okay.
But I'm pretty optimistic.
All right. I had to ask. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person watching this video. It's a week from now. They've watched this video. They've learned a lot. They're like, wow, I didn't know that much about polling. I got an inside look at polling. I understand it way more than they ever advise us. But I'm struggling to remember it all. But there was this one thing the professor said, and boy, it's 5 days after I watched that video, and I can't forget this one thing the professor said in that video. What is that one thing you want a random person you'll never meet to not be able to forget 5 days after watching this video because it was so impactful?
Be informed. Be informed. Don't take one person's knowledge as gospel. Don't even take Suffolk alone. Look at other polls, but hopefully you'll look at our polls too. And the more informed you are, the better you'll be, not only in politics, but in your own health, your own job situation, your own life, your marriage, relationship, whatever it is. More information is better than less. People can criticize us because, we're not exact, or we don't get it, we missed, or we didn't get it right. But I would argue it's better to have some information than none. If you're going to open a business, a hardware store in a community, you sure as hell, should be taking a survey about whether or not there's a demand for tools and hardware products. And that's what research is. The more, the merrier. Some might be bad, some might be good, but if you're informed, then you're well armed to conquer the challenges in your life.
And if I'm not mistaken,
yeah, there you go. And just toggle down, and you'll see the.
Oh, there we go. There you go. I think that's it.
Yeah.
There. Is that the correct website?
Yes, it is.
Suffolk University Political Research Center. There's the
Yeah.
URL, but that's the webpage you're going to want to look for. You can go to
Right.
suffolk.edu/SUPRC, or type in Suffolk University Political Research Center. That's where you can watch for the Ohio poll coming up in the next week.
That's right. We're starting to roll out results next week.
Okay. I hope you found this was a fair interview.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was mean.
Let's do it
Okay.
again.
Hey, that's great. Okay, perfect. I would love to have you back. Do you have any recommendations? Anybody that you think might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? They could be an activist in academia. You don't have to name anybody here, but we always like to keep the conversation going. If you can think of anybody,
Will do. I'll circle back with you for sure. Glad to help out. Glad to help out.
Professor, thank you for coming out. I will email you a copy of the video shortly. And I really appreciate your time, and I definitely will take you up on having you back out in a couple of months.
Great. Wishing you continued success.
Thank you, Professor.
Take care.